It wasn't the sound of the cup breaking that startled her. It was the laughter that followed. Not loud laughter, worse, the kind that hides behind smirks and sideways glances. The kind people share when they think you won't say anything back. The coffee hadn't even cooled when it splashed across her lap, a dark bloom spreading through her pale yellow sweater. She froze. Not from the heat, but from the sudden stillness that swallowed the room. No one gasped. No one offered a napkin. The man responsible, tall, white, mid-30s, leather vest stitched with the emblem Iron Reapers, didn't even look sorry. He just grinned, shook the drops from his glove and said, "Guess some people should watch where they're sittin'." Martha didn't speak. Didn't move. Just watched the way the brown liquid crept across her skirt, forming small, trembling rivers. Her knitting yarn, soft blue wool, had fallen to the floor. One of the threads tangled around the biker's boot. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did. That morning, the Morning Hearth Cafe smelled of cinnamon and burnt toast, just like it always did. It sat on the corner of Maple and 9th, a place small enough that regulars didn't need menus, just nods. The same faces, the same coffee rings on the counter, the same radio humming faintly above the pastry case. Martha Lewis, 72, widow, retired librarian, sat in her usual chair by the window, the one beneath the ivy plant that had somehow survived every winter. Every morning at 7:30 sharp she'd arrive with her knitting bag, order black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and settle into her quiet ritual. Loop, pull, breathe. She knitted because silence felt softer when her hands were busy. Because the house, ever since Henry passed, had too many echoes and not enough voices. Her only son Daniel had joined the army 10 years ago. He called on Sundays when the line was clear. "You okay, Ma?" he'd always ask. She'd always say yes, even when the roof leaked or the arthritis flared. Because mothers don't worry their children, especially the ones already in harm's way. That morning the cafe had been louder than usual. The Iron Reapers had rolled into town for the annual bike rally, turning the quiet streets of Pinegrove into a rattle of engines and beer breath. They weren't all bad, but they carried trouble like perfume, subtle but hard to ignore. And now one of them stood above her, smirking at the stain he'd made. "Don't just stand there, Martha," came a shaky voice from behind the counter. It was Eva, the young barista who always drew hearts and foam and forgot to charge her regulars for refills. "Let me grab a towel." But before Eva could move, another biker, older, stockier, gray beard, the kind of man whose silence was meant to intimidate, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Leave it," he said flatly. The cafe went still again. You could hear the spoon clink against a half-empty mug 3 tables away. Martha looked around, at the retirees she'd seen every morning for years, at the couple in the corner pretending to read the menu, at the teenager scrolling through his phone, pretending not to see. Nobody moved. Her heart hurt more than the burn. Not from shame, from memory. Because she'd seen that look before, decades ago, when buses were divided, when accidents like this weren't accidents at all. Still she didn't yell. Didn't cry. She just reached down, picked up her fallen yarn, and looked up at the man who'd spilled her coffee. Her voice was calm, even kind. "You dropped something," she said softly, tugging the yarn from under his boot. The biker frowned, confused. "What?" She smiled, a small tired smile, and pulled the thread. It came loose fast, unwinding from his boot in a spiral. "Respect," she said, almost whispering. "You dropped respect." He sneered. "What did you just say to me, old lady?" But before he could take a step, the cafe door opened. A young man, mid-20s, mixed race, camera bag slung over his shoulder, froze at the sight. He'd seen the spill, the tension, the faces pretending not to notice. His phone was already recording before he even realized it. The older biker turned toward him, voice low. "Turn that off." The young man didn't. And just like that, the silence broke, not with a scream, not with a punch, but with truth. Because Pinegrove was a small town, the kind that buried its ugliness under polite smiles. But what happened in the Morning Hearth Cafe that morning would not stay buried. Not this time. Not after the video went up. Not after people saw who Martha Lewis really was, and what she refused to let the world take from her. Justice this time would not come quietly. By the next morning, Pinegrove wasn't quiet anymore. The video, just 43 seconds long, had already found its way from a stranger's phone to every Facebook feed, group chat, and gossip corner in town. It wasn't violent. No punches. No shouting. Just a coffee spill, a woman's steady voice, and a sentence that landed heavier than fists. "You dropped respect." Those 3 words echoed louder than engines. The Morning Hearth Cafe opened as usual, but the air inside felt different. Eva moved slower behind the counter. The regulars, the same ones who hadn't met Martha's eyes the day before, sat in stiff silence, nursing guilt with their morning brew. Martha didn't come in that day. She sat at home instead, in her small living room that smelled faintly of lavender oil and old books. The news played quietly in the background. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, numbers she didn't recognize, voices she didn't need to hear. A few kind, most curious, some cruel. One message read, "You embarrass this town." Another said, "We stand with you, Miss Martha." She turned the phone face down and went back to her knitting. Blue wool again. She'd been working on a blanket for the local shelter before all this. But now, her hands trembled every time she tried to loop the thread. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, exhaustion disguised as calm. Outside, kids biked past her window shouting, "That's her house," like she was some kind of legend. Or criminal. Pinegrove didn't do in between. By afternoon, 2 trucks from the Iron Reapers rolled down her street. Their engines coughed, their chrome gleamed like polished arrogance. They didn't stop, not yet, just slowed enough to make sure she saw them. One of the men lifted his helmet slightly and spat onto the curb. Martha didn't move from the window. She just watched until the sound faded. Then she sighed. When evening came, Eva showed up at her doorstep, her apron still on, eyes puffy from crying. "I should have said something," she whispered before Martha could speak. "Yesterday, when he spilled it, I just froze." Martha smiled faintly, opening the door wider. "Freezing's human," she said. "Staying frozen isn't." They sat together at the kitchen table, 2 women from different worlds, bound by one morning's silence. Eva brought news. The cafe owner had received threats for letting the video woman sit there every morning. Someone spray-painted troublemaker across the back alley wall. "People act like I started a war," Martha said softly, staring at her cup of tea. "All I did was sit and drink coffee." "You stood up," Eva corrected. "That's what scares them." Just then the landline rang. The sound jolted the small kitchen. Martha answered, her voice steady. "Ma." It was Daniel. Her son. For a second she couldn't speak, just listened to the static hum of the overseas line. "I saw it," he said finally. His voice cracked slightly, the way it had when he was 10 and confessed to breaking a window. "I saw what they did." Martha exhaled, eyes welling. "I'm fine, baby. I should have been there." "No," she said quickly. "You're doing your duty. Don't you carry my battles when you already have your own." But Daniel wasn't convinced. "They're saying you provoked them." Local paper twisted it. "Said it was an accident, that you overreacted." Martha smiled, sad and small. "If quietness is overreacting, then I've been overreacting all my life." There was a long pause. Then Daniel said something that stayed with her long after the call ended. "They don't know who raised me, Ma. But they're about to." That night, the town board held an emergency meeting, not about the bikers but about the image of Pinegrove. The mayor, a man who prided himself on keeping the peace, used words like misunderstanding and both sides. The cafe owner wasn't invited. Neither was Martha. Meanwhile, in the small diner across town, the Iron Reapers laughed over beer, watching the clip on someone's cracked phone screen. "Town's all soft now," one muttered. "Back in the day we'd handle it our way." "Leave her alone," another voice said, low, steady. Heads turned. It was Caleb, the youngest in the crew, the one who'd filmed the video. "You recording us now too?" the older man sneered. Caleb didn't answer. Just got up, dropped a few bills on the table and walked out. Outside, he scrolled through his phone, paused on the thumbnail of Martha's face mid-sentence, calm, unflinching. He didn't know why he'd filmed it. Maybe instinct. Maybe conscience. But now he knew it mattered. Because it showed a truth this town had ignored for decades. That cruelty didn't always wear chains or badges. Sometimes it wore denim and silence. He stopped outside the morning hearth. The troublemaker graffiti still shone wet under the streetlight. He took out a rag from his backpack and began to scrub. Inside her house, Martha couldn't sleep. The blue yarn lay unfinished on the coffee table. The clock ticked softly, a patient reminder that time moves even when courage feels stuck. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle at first, then heavier. And as the first drops hit her window, Martha whispered into the dim light. "If respect is something they can spill, then it's something I can reclaim." She didn't know how yet. But she would. Because silence had protected them long enough. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It fell over Pinegrove like a confession, steady, relentless, cleansing the sidewalks and making the town's painted fronts look a little more honest. The troublemaker graffiti outside the cafe had been washed to a ghost of gray, and with it, Something else in the air began to shift, not loudly but in whispers. Martha went back to the morning hearth that Wednesday, same time, same seat. Her scarf was navy this time, her hands tucked neatly around a steaming cup. The regulars glanced up, then back down again like children caught in guilt. Eva smiled faintly from behind the counter. No one dared to speak of the video. But everyone had seen it. Even the mayor's wife had reposted it with the caption, "Decency should not be controversial." Across town, the Iron Reapers weren't laughing anymore. One of their sponsors, the owner of the auto shop, had quietly ended their discount deal. The local grocery stopped serving them beer. No one said it was because of Martha, but everyone knew it was because of Martha. Justice, it seemed, didn't need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needed witnesses who couldn't unsee what they'd seen. Still, Martha felt no joy in it. She didn't want humiliation, only humanity. But Pinegrove had a long memory for the wrong kind of things. That afternoon, as she left the café, she found a folded note tucked into her knitting bag. The handwriting was neat but rushed. "Meet me at the library after hours. Don't tell anyone. See." Martha frowned but went. The Pinegrove Public Library was one of her favorite places, small with the faint smell of dust and rain-soaked paper. She entered through the side door, the one the janitor left unlocked. Inside, the lamps glowed amber, soft against the dark. Caleb was waiting near the history section, his hood pulled low. He looked younger than she'd imagined, barely 20, face pale and anxious. "I filmed it," he said quietly. "The video. I didn't mean for it to spread like that." Martha studied him, the nervous way he kept rubbing his palms together, the guilt that clung to his words like static. "You did right," she said. "Truth's not a crime." He shook his head. "They think I betrayed them. The Reapers said I made them look weak." "Maybe weakness isn't what they think it is," Martha replied. He hesitated, then pulled out a flash drive. "There's more," he said. "They've been meeting behind the old station. Talking about teaching lessons. I don't know if they'll actually do something, but—" "Then let's make sure they don't," Martha interrupted softly. Her tone wasn't angry, it was calm, measured, maternal. The kind of calm that made people listen. That night she called Daniel. Not to worry him but to ask for help, not the kind he was used to with badges or orders but advice. "Sometimes," he told her, "the only way to win is to let the truth walk into the light on its own. You can't fight darkness with more darkness, Ma. You show them a mirror." Martha hung up and sat by her window for a long time, thinking. Rain dripped down the glass in thin, trembling lines. In the reflection she saw not just her own face but the faces of every woman she'd ever taught, every child who'd been told they were too much, or not enough. She reached for her knitting bag. Not for yarn this time, but for the note Caleb had given her. The next morning, the town's community coffee hour, a monthly gathering of local shop owners and officials, took place at the café. The same place where it all began. Martha walked in quietly, scarf tied firm, eyes clear. The café buzzed with murmurs, but the noise softened when she entered. The mayor looked startled. The Reapers' leader, Dean, sat in the back, pretending not to notice her. She didn't ask to speak. She didn't need to. She simply placed a small USB drive on the counter beside the pastries. "This belongs to the town," she said softly. "You'll want to play it before you decide who the troublemaker is." Then she left. The clip that followed, recorded by Caleb, played later that afternoon in the town's community office. It showed a group of bikers laughing about what happened at the café, calling it a lesson in putting people back in place. Their words didn't need interpretation. Their own voices condemned them. By evening, Pinegrove streets were quieter than ever. The Reapers' clubhouse was found empty by nightfall, helmets gone, windows shattered. No one knew where they went. But for the first time in years, the café stayed open past sunset, the warm smell of cinnamon filling the air again. Martha sat by the window knitting slowly. People came by, not to stare, not to whisper, but to nod, to thank her. Eva brought her an extra scone, free of charge. "For bravery," she said. Martha smiled, shaking her head. "For humanity," she corrected. The next morning, someone left flowers by her window, a small bouquet of wild daisies tied with string. No note, no name. Just color where there'd been gray. And in that quiet, Martha realized something profound. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply sits, unbothered, unyielding, sipping coffee while the world remembers how to be decent again. But Pinegrove wasn't done changing. The storm had only cleared the air. What came next would test what kind of town they truly were, and how far ordinary people were willing to go when silence was no longer an option. Because for every truth spoken, there was always someone still afraid to listen. And Martha, calm, stubborn, unshaken, was ready to make them listen. Morning came softly to Pinegrove. The rain had finally stopped, and with it came a sky scrubbed clean, pale gold and streaked with light, like forgiveness after confession. The town smelled of wet brick and earth, the kind of air that made you believe something might actually change. At the morning hearth, the bell above the door chimed for the first time that day. Martha entered, her gray scarf tucked neatly under her chin, her knitting bag slung over her arm. The same seat by the window was waiting, sunlight spilling across it like it had been saving that spot just for her. Eva was already behind the counter. "You're early," she said, her voice warm but cautious, as if the town's peace might still be fragile. "Habit," Martha replied. "Some routines keep the world from falling apart." Eva smiled faintly and poured her a cup, black, 1 sugar, no cream. Just how she liked it. The steam rose gently, carrying with it the faint scent of cinnamon scones baking in the oven. The café was fuller than usual. People whispered softly, not gossip, but reflection. The video had become a mirror the whole town had been forced to look into. And for once they didn't turn away. Martha didn't expect gratitude. But what she found instead was something better: acknowledgement. The mayor's assistant stopped by her table first. "Mrs. Lewis," she said carefully, "the council's calling a special session this afternoon. They'll be discussing policy changes, senior outreach, anti-discrimination charters, that sort of thing. The mayor wanted me to personally invite you." Martha looked up, eyes steady but kind. "Policy's good," she said. "But hearts change slower than papers." "I know," the young woman whispered. "That's why we need you there." By noon, word spread that the Iron Reapers had been disbanded. Officially, they ceased operation after their clubhouse lease was terminated. Unofficially, nobody wanted to associate with them anymore. The grocery stopped extending credit. The auto shop removed their emblem from the window. And Dean Mercer, their leader, had been fired from his warehouse job after the audio of him laughing about putting people back in place made it to his employer's desk. Justice hadn't come in handcuffs. It came in quiet consequences, the kind that stripped away arrogance and left a man to face himself. Still, Martha didn't rejoice. Retaliation wasn't the point. Recognition was. And that afternoon, Pinegrove finally decided to recognize her. The town hall filled beyond capacity. Folding chairs were pulled from storage, people stood shoulder to shoulder in the aisles. A local reporter from Channel 9 News stood near the back, microphone poised. The buzz of voices mixed with the creak of old floorboards. Mayor Hensley took the podium, visibly nervous. "Folks," he began, "what happened here wasn't just an incident. It was a reflection of who we've become and who we refuse to keep being. We owe our gratitude to Mrs. Martha Whitlow, who reminded us that silence in the face of cruelty is its own kind of participation." Applause filled the room. Real applause, not polite, not practiced, the kind that carried emotion in its rhythm. Martha stood slowly. She didn't like speeches, but she understood their necessity. "I'm no hero," she began. Her voice was steady but soft, the kind that made a room lean in to hear. "I'm a woman who likes her coffee hot and her peace quiet. But peace means nothing if it only exists for some." She paused. "You can't knit a good town with rotten thread. You pull the bad pieces out or the whole thing unravels." The room fell silent. Even the mayor lowered his eyes. "I didn't do this alone," Martha continued. "Caleb showed courage when he recorded what others ignored. Eva stood by when silence was easier. You all chose to watch that video to talk about it. That's what justice looks like, not one loud act but 100 small ones stitched together." Then she stepped back. The applause this time lasted long enough to bring tears to Eva's eyes. After the meeting, reporters crowded near her, cameras flashing. One asked, "Mrs. Whitlow, do you think justice was served?" She smiled faintly. "Justice isn't a meal you serve once," she said. "It's a table you keep setting, so no one's left standing." Her words would replay across local stations for the next week. The town, once known for its quiet conformity, was now being called the place that learned to listen. That evening, Martha returned to her small house at the edge of Pinegrove. The sun dipped low, gold spilling through the curtains. The scarf she'd been knitting for Daniel lay finished on her armchair, navy and cream, the threads tight, even, unbroken. She picked it up, running her hands over the fabric, feeling the rhythm of her own patience woven through every loop. Outside, children played on bicycles, laughter echoing down the street. It was the kind of sound she hadn't heard in months, unguarded, honest, alive. A knock came at the door. When she opened it, Caleb stood there, awkward and unsure. "I wanted to say thank you," he began. "For not letting them scare me. For making people see." Martha smiled. "You did the seeing, son. I just made sure they couldn't close their eyes again." He nodded, holding out a folded newspaper. "They printed your speech." She took it gently. On the front page, her picture, scarf, smile, coffee cup in hand, under the headline, "One Woman, One Town, One Truth." Later that night, Martha sat by her window again, a cup of tea warming her hands. Across the street, she could see people gathered outside the café, stringing up a new sign. She couldn't read it from her house, but curiosity tugged at her. So she walked over. The sign was hand-painted in bold white letters across a wooden board. "The Morning Hearth Café, where dignity lives." Underneath, smaller writing, "In honor of Martha Whitlow." The crowd clapped as she approached, and Eva hugged her tightly. "You gave us our spine back," Eva said through tears. Martha chuckled softly. "You always had it. Just needed to remember how to stand." The night air was cool. Fireflies winked along the fence posts. Pinegrove's clock tower chimed 8 times, each note echoing through the quiet streets. Martha sat outside the café, sipping her tea, watching the reflections of people through the glass, laughing, talking, unafraid. For the first time, she didn't feel like a widow sitting alone. She felt like a thread in something larger, fragile maybe, but connected. Justice hadn't come with sirens or apologies. It came in the form of change, subtle, stubborn, permanent. And as she looked at the town she'd called home for over 40 years, she realized something. She hadn't just corrected an injustice. She'd reminded Pinegrove of its humanity. When she got home, a message blinked on her phone, a video call from Daniel. His face appeared, tired but proud. "Ma," he said, "I saw everything. You handled it better than most captains I know." She laughed softly. "You taught me half of it. The rest, I learned from living long enough to know silence never saved anyone." He grinned. "You're trending again." "Oh mercy," she groaned. "What now?" Hashtag the coffee shop widow. People everywhere are talking about you. Teachers, veterans, nurses, they're sharing stories about standing up when it's uncomfortable. "You started something, Ma." She smiled, eyes misty. Then maybe this old town was just waiting for permission to be brave. They talked until the stars filled the window behind her, until laughter replaced worry. And when they said goodbye, she whispered, "Be safe out there. There's still too much to fix in this world." Later, as the house settled into silence, Martha picked up her knitting again. The rhythm soothed her, click, loop, pull, the quiet proof that something could still be made whole, one stitch at a time. She thought about Caleb, about Eva, about Dean Mercer somewhere trying to piece together his own redemption. About the town that had once turned its face away from injustice and now couldn't stop looking at it. And she smiled because this was justice. Not vengeance. Not noise. But the steady hum of people who finally learned to care. She poured herself another cup of tea, leaned back and whispered softly, "Let them keep watching." If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage doesn't need a crowd, that kindness can correct cruelty, and that one person's quiet defiance can echo through an entire town, don't let it end here. Share this story so someone else finds their voice. Comment below what justice means to you. Is it fairness, empathy, or something we build together? Subscribe if you believe stories like Martha's deserve to be told, because truth doesn't fade, it multiplies when we tell it out loud. And remember, sometimes the smallest act, like standing your ground over a single cup of coffee, can wake an entire town.